I'm Sylvia Mayer. Thank you for clicking on Mayer on Mediation. Tilling the soil pre-mediation. Pre-mediation communication enables the mediator to increase the opportunity for resolution in the mediation. Let me start by sharing an example of how this can work to help the parties find their path to resolution. I had the case a year or two ago where the parties were in an ongoing business relationship, but they had a big bump in the road that had caused everything to stop. It was in each party's interest to move forward, but they could not find any way to do so. They had talked, they had reached a point where they were not getting along and they could not continue having constructive dialogue on their own. So they came to mediation. I had a series of phone calls with the attorneys for each side prior to the mediation. And through those conversations, we were able to determine that they really did want to find a way to get past all of the interpersonal issues, the distrust, the sense of betrayal for each side, and find a path to work together to move forward, because that was in the best interest of both parties. And by the time I concluded the last pre-mediation phone call, one of the attorneys said to me, "I have never had a mediator before who did this. You basically mediated the case before we got to mediation," because we had already reached an agreement on what they wanted to accomplish in the mediation. And we then spent the day in mediation putting the details on the framework we had negotiated in advance. And the result was that the parties were allowed to move forward with an ongoing business relationship to the benefit of both of them and to put their history behind them. So it was important to use the pre-mediation process to identify the nature of the dispute, the undercurrents to that dispute, meaning the interpersonal issues, what was really going on, and the business concerns and implications related to that dispute. And I also needed to understand the history of settlement talks, because the settlement talks had gone past each other. They had missed the boat time and time again in terms of trying to find a way for them to go forward together. So I use pre-calls in mediation, not just in that case, but in almost all of my cases, to establish a rapport and connection with the counsel who will be representing the parties in mediation, to deepen my understanding of the dispute, including the strengths and weaknesses for each side, to clarify the history of settlement talks, which I want to understand not only so that I know what the bid and ask were before we got to mediation, but also so that I can understand the dynamics of the settlement talks, because that dynamic often carries forward into the mediation. And sometimes we need to shift things. We need to shake things up in order to find a path to resolution. And one of the things I make sure I always do in my pre-calls with counsel before a mediation is find out what's not in their mediation statement. What are things that I should know that they didn't write down? Perhaps there's a sensitivity that their client has. Perhaps their client is really upset and really needs an opportunity to share their story. Perhaps no one has thought about certain avenues for resolution, and we can brainstorm and throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall on these phone calls to see what might stick when we get to mediation. There may be something we talk about in a pre-mediation call that requires the attorney and his client or her client to go and do additional work and think about things before we get to the mediation. And this gives them the time to do that. So it's really important to till the soil pre-mediation so that we can have fertile ground to find a path to resolution once we get to the mediation, and to use this pre-mediation dialogue to make connection, seek clarification, and to explore additional information. Thank you for joining me today to talk about mediation preparation and tilling the soil to enhance your opportunity for resolution. Thanks so much for joining me. If you have any questions, please comment below.